Recently, Hasan Piker, popular Twitch streamer and leftist political commentator, criticized Kamala Harris for appearing with Liz Cheney. He also criticized the Democratic Party's broader strategy of courting never-Trump Republicans. These arguments reflect valid frustrations, but overlook the more important realities of the 2024 election. Although his critiques of Democratic messaging resonate with many young progressives, particularly when he points out the ideological disconnect of aligning with neoconservative figures, the documented impacts of Trump's first term demonstrate why strategic voting, supporting a candidate who can actually win and who best aligns with our values, remains essential. As I discussed in a prior post and YouTube video, where sources for some of the claims of this video can be found, Trump's 2017 to 2021 presidency inflicted quantifiable damage across multiple sectors. In education alone, he proposed a $7 billion cut to the education department, eliminated $1.2 billion for after-school programs serving 1.6 million poor children, cut $2.1 billion for teacher training and class size reduction, and rescinded Obama-era guidance promoting racial diversity in admissions. His healthcare agenda attempted to repeal the Affordable Care Act, threatening coverage for over 20 million Americans, while his administration rolled back transgender healthcare protections, supported lawsuits eliminating pre-existing condition protections, and actively opposed legislation to reduce prescription drug costs, even as prices rose 10%. The assault on workers' rights under Trump was equally severe. His administration restricted overtime eligibility for more than 8 million workers, reduced occupational safety and health administration inspectors to historic lows, weakened coal dust exposure limits, and stacked the National Labor Relations Board with anti-union appointees. His immigration policies implemented family separation, affecting thousands of children, severely restricted asylum access, and banned travel from multiple Muslim-majority countries. Environmental protections were gutted as Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, rolled back over 100 environmental regulations, and weakened emissions standards for power plants and vehicles. Has Piker forgotten the destruction and misery under Trump? Piker's critique of Harris's campaign strategy misses the forest for the trees. He's right to push for more progressive policies. Yet, his focus on Harris's perceived centrism overlooks the contrast with Trump's divisive tenure. Harris may have shifted on some topics, but equating her approach to Trump's or the GOP's ignores serious nuances and risks downplaying the real consequences of a potential Trump return. Piker's call for Harris to run on hope and change is valid, but it glosses over the complex realities of governing in today's polarized climate. A more balanced view would recognize both the need for progressive ideals and the practical challenges Harris faces in appealing to a broad electorate. In this case, Piker's perspective, shared by much of his audience, reflects a presentist bias, where judging Harris solely by today's progressive standards neglects the broader historical and modern contexts of her policies compared to Trump's. That is to emphasize, although Piker correctly identifies the Democratic establishment's strategic shortcomings, particularly in their messaging to young voters and progressive constituencies, the immediate threat of a second Trump term cannot be understated. Hasan Piker is a single-problem thinker. He cares primarily, almost exclusively, about Gaza. The genocide in Gaza is important, but it is not the sole problem in the world, or even the only ongoing genocide. See my content on the Rohingya genocide that began in 2017. The Trump administration's proven track record of undermining democratic institutions, rolling back civil rights protections, and implementing harmful policies affecting marginalized communities makes clear the stakes of the 2024 election. As a reminder, Trump is far more pro-Israel than Biden or Harris, has called for Israel to finish the problem in its war with Hamas, and has used the word Palestinian as a slur.
I'm on the side of Israel! side of Israel, and they're on the side of the terrorists.
Piker and his followers must understand that strategic voting, supporting a viable candidate who aligns most closely with our views and desires, isn't about endorsing everything Harris and the Democratic establishment represent. It's about preventing demonstrable harm to vulnerable populations while maintaining space for longer-term organizing and reform. The choice isn't between perfect options, but between meaningfully different outcomes that will affect millions of lives. A second Trump term, likely to be even more extreme with fewer institutional guardrails, poses an existential threat to democratic governance, civil rights, and, yes, the lives of Palestinians. Real progressive change requires both electoral engagement and sustained organizing outside electoral politics. We can acknowledge the Democratic Party's flaws, and there are many, while recognizing that preventing a second Trump term is imperative for preserving basic democratic institutions and civil rights. The stakes are especially high for marginalized communities, from women seeking health care to immigrants facing deportation by the millions, to minorities targeted by discriminatory policies, to Palestinians currently suffering genocide and displacement at the hands of Israel. The "both sides are bad" argument that often resonates with Piker's audience fundamentally misunderstands the nature of harm reduction in real-world politics. Legitimate criticisms exist regarding the Democratic establishment's position on Gaza and other foreign policy matters, but the solution isn't to disengage from electoral politics entirely or to spoiler vote. Trump's specific threat to higher education, my own field of work, exemplifies why his administration actively worked to dismantle educational institutions, with his potential second term promising even more aggressive actions against academia. He has already emboldened state legislatures and Republican governors to attack academic freedom, diversity initiatives, and public education funding. The Department of Education itself could face dissolution under a second Trump term. This isn't abstract political theory. It's a direct threat to millions of students, educators, and researchers. Those arguing that choosing the lesser evil is immoral miss a crucial point. Politics isn't about personal moral purity, but about real-world outcomes for vulnerable people. As Piker himself has quoted at one time or another, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." Unfortunately, he doesn't seem to be able to follow this mantra consistently. Young leftists would benefit from engaging with pragmatic, progressive thinkers like Andre Gores and Mariam Kaba, both of whom I have discussed in previous works, who understood and understand that transformative change requires both principled vision and strategic engagement with existing systems. Voting for Kamala Harris, who has a realistic chance of winning the 2024 election, doesn't preclude criticism of her positions or continued activism for Palestinian rights and other vital causes. Progressives won't cease to exist and lose all their power and voice if she wins the election. Instead, voting for Harris preserves the institutional framework within which progressive change remains possible. The fact is, elections in the United States can be decided by razor-thin margins, and third-party candidates typically receive less than 1% of the popular vote in general elections. Not enough to win, but potentially enough to change the results in swing states. This makes strategic voting not just pragmatic, but necessary in our current system. Grassroots organizing, advocacy, and community activism are essential for creating systemic change and would be the only way to ever make a third party viable in the US. But these efforts become significantly more difficult under authoritarian leadership. The battle for the zeitgeist of our nation requires both electoral engagement and sustained organizing outside traditional political channels. Bottom line, voting is just one tool, but in this case, it's an important one. Disengaging from the process won't fix its problems, and spoiler voting only helps our opposition. Third parties are never made viable at the ballot box. That must begin at the community level. The re-election of Donald Trump will have consequences not just for the US, but for the world. His first term demonstrated that idealist apathy and partisan abstinence, or divisions over purity, have real human costs. Our votes can save lives. We must be clear-eyed about using every available lever to prevent worst-case outcomes while building power for deeper change.